Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'd like to welcome viewers to this program about the UK Sikh Survey. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the Sikh Identity. In January 2015, before the general election, the Sikh Manifesto was released to tell politicians about the various issues that matter to the Sikh community. And within that manifesto were a number of issues linked to the Sikh identity. After a year following the general election, the Sikh network launched the UK Sikh Survey, the largest survey of its kind. 4,559 people responded to that survey. And today, I'm going to share with you the results of that survey in relation to the Sikh identity. But before I do that, let's put the whole issue of the Sikh identity into context. Although the very first Sikh that lived in this country was Maharaja Dalip Singh, what we know is that Sikhs started to come in much larger numbers, largely from the Punjab to begin with, but later from Africa. They began to come here in the 1950s, following the Second World War. And many Sikhs, a bit like my father, who came in the late 50s, many Sikhs were faced with discrimination. They were faced with discrimination for their very identity. They were not just brown-skinned, but some of them wore turbans, some of them had beards. In fact, the vast majority that came here were like that in the 1950s and 1960s. And therefore, that very identity that the British had promoted in India, had promoted in the armed forces in India, all of a sudden, when ordinary Sikhs came to the UK, many came here. If you have parents, grandparents that came here in the 50s and 60s, you will know they came here with the view to spending a short period of time in this country, earning an honest living and trying to help their families back home in Punjab. But what they found when they came here was if they wanted jobs, they often faced discrimination because of their turbans and beards. Because that's the other thing. A lot of the people that came here, a lot of the Sikhs that came here in the 50s and 60s were Sikh men. The women and families came much later. And therefore, those Sikhs, some of them chose to give up their identity. They cut their hair, removed their turbans, because that was the situation they faced. And sometimes we hear about this in countries in Europe where Sikhs have been living for a lot less longer, and many Sikhs there choose to remove their turban simply to get jobs. So that's the background, that in the 50s and 60s, our Sikh identity, the identity given to us by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, was being compromised because of circumstances, because of discrimination. Now let's fast forward. Various times the Sikh identity has been challenged and Sikhs have stood strong. The very first case that I'm aware of came in the 1960s, the late 1960s, when a Sikh wanted to drive a bus in Wolverhampton and wear his turban. And that case was fought and it was won. And the Sikhs had the right to drive buses wearing their turban. The next real case of any significance came in the 1970s, where Sikhs fought and campaigned and lobbied, probably for the first time, for the right for any Sikh who wants to ride a motorbike wearing not a crash helmet but a turban. And Sikhs were successful then, and actually that was the first change in the law which allowed the Sikh identity and the turban to be protected. And ever since, and it's probably coming up to now, I would say, 40 years. For 40 odd years, Sikhs have had the right in the UK to ride a motorbike wearing their turban and not a crash helmet. In places like Canada, we have many ministers there, we have many MPs there, but in places like Ontario, you still cannot, a Sikh wearing a turban cannot ride a motorbike. They must wear a crash helmet. So therefore, these are hard-fought rights that we have won. The next major test on the Sikh identity came in 1983 in the Mandla versus Lee case that ended up in the House of Lords. Siva Singh Mandla's son was denied the right to wear his turban when going to school. And Mr. Lee, the headmaster, refused to let Siva Singh Mandla's son enter that school wearing his turban. And that case in 1983 ended up in the House of Lords. Very famous case, Mandla versus Lee, and Sikhs won the legal right to wear the turban to school. But not just that, they were recognised under law as a separate ethnic group, protected under the Race Relations Act of 1976. And that case, that legislation, has been used many times to protect the Sikh identity because we're recognised as an ethnic group, as a race, not just a religion. So let me now, having put that into context, talk about what the UK Sikh survey has shown. And I'll link it back to issues within the Sikh Manifesto. Let me talk about the first of these issues. First issue is the extent to which Sikhs are born in this country. We asked that question in the UK Sikh survey. How many of you are born in this country? And it produced a very interesting result. It showed 69% of all Sikhs that respond to the survey were people that were born here in the UK. Now let's go back to the last census of 2011, where the Office for National Statistics have some data on the different communities. In 2011, only 33% of the Hindu community living here were actually born in this country. Take the Muslim community, only 47% of Muslims living in this country born here. And in 2011, 57% of all Sikhs were born here. And what this survey showed in 2016 was that that number had risen from 57 to 69%. So therefore, the vast majority of Sikhs living in this country are born here. And that is part of our identity. That is a part of our Britishness. Now let's look at that differently. Let's look at it in terms of the age profile. Many Sikhs under the age of 50 are born here. We split the survey into different age categories. Those aged between 40 and 49, 68% of them are born in this country. And that percentage gets higher and higher the younger you get, until you get into the 90%. So therefore, this is a really important message for the government here, for public bodies here, and also for our own community, to our gurdwaras, our institutions, because what the survey is showing is that most Sikhs living in this country under the age of 50 were born here. And if they were born here, you can guarantee that they'll be British speaking, English speaking. And that's why we're giving some of these programs on KTV in English. So it's only when you look at people aged over 50, so 50 to 60, 27% of them were born here. So even that, there's a sizable number. It's only when you start looking at the over 60s that that percentage becomes quite small. And what will happen over a period of time is those percentages will just increase in terms of those born here. And therefore, this is something that we must deal with in the next 20 to 30 years in terms of the needs of our community. Now let me move on to another statistic that came out of the survey. We asked the question around nationality. To what extent are Sikhs British nationals? And what we found was that 91% of all those that responded to the survey said they were British nationals. Now, that's not hugely surprising because if you were born here, and we said 69% are, the chances are you will have British nationality. But many others that clearly weren't born here have chosen to become British nationals and have a British passport. So if you look at our identity and combine those two things, people born here and having that nationality, it's very much part of our Britishness. And let me tell you a bit about what the overall population looks like. The overall population, taking all communities and looking at their nationality, actually the national figure is also 91%. And that figure has actually been decreasing. So about 5 or 6 years ago, the number of people living in the UK that were British nationals stood at 95%, and it's come down to 91%. And the key reason is an influx from Europe. So if you take the Polish community, there's estimated to be about 800,000 Poles living in the UK, and a very small fraction, around 5%, have chose to become British nationals. So in other words, they've, a bit like our forefathers that came in the 50s and 60s, many have come here probably for jobs, and many have retained their own nationality and perhaps with a view to actually returning to Poland at some stage. And very small numbers, like I said, 5% have chose to become British nationals. Now what that's meant is if you have a large influx, such as from Poland, it means that percentage has come down from 95 to 91%. And I think that sense of change that we've been seeing around us, of people coming from Europe, living here, but retaining their nationality, retaining their language, was a huge issue when it came to the Brexit vote last year. Now, if you take that one stage further, let's look at some of the statistics I gave earlier. Only 33% of the Hindu community chose to become British. 33% were born in this country. And if only 33% were born here, a lot of them have chosen not to become British nationals. So I think comparing the Sikh community to some other ethnic minorities, some other religious communities, we are more British than most. And in fact, we're British in terms of our nationality as the average person on the street, despite the fact that most people are born here of all communities. Let me now move on to one or two of the other statistics in the survey. A key issue that's come up again and again has been in the mainstream media, in the world of politics, this phrase evasion. It's a phrase that people use because they're lazy and it's convenient. So when they want to talk in the media about something that's happened, good or bad, they will often say Asians were responsible. Now what we've been seeing in recent years is the whole issue of grooming. And when you have the issue of grooming, you pick up a newspaper, you hear about grooming gangs, you see some pictures, you see the names of these individuals, and we all know what the background of those individuals often are. And what the Sikh community and also the Hindu community have been saying is that actually why aren't we specific when it comes to good news or bad news? If a Sikh is responsible for something good or bad, say it's Sikh. It happens now. But often when it comes to issues like grooming, the media and politicians have deliberately used the word Asian. Now, what does Asian mean? Asia is a massive country. China is a part of Asia, the biggest population in the world. And yet, the word Asian often means to people of brown skin. And so, we asked a question in the UK Sikh survey is, how do you want to be referred to? Do you want to be referred to as Sikh, Asian, or Indian, or any other? And 19 out of 20 rejected the whole idea of being called Asian. So 95% of you said you want to be called Sikh. So if you take the combination of those questions, firstly, where you're born, secondly, your nationality, and thirdly, what do you call yourselves? And the overwhelming majority, 95%, say they want to be called Sikh and they want to be recognised as Sikh. So tomorrow, when something happens that involves the Sikh community, involves an individual in the Sikh community, we do not have a problem of saying, good or bad, let's refer to them as Sikh. Because only if you use the correct terminology can you actually identify whether there's a particular need in a particular community, and that can be addressed by the community itself and by those who make policy. But if you use politically correct terms like Asian, what you're doing is you are hiding away from the issue. And Sikhs know you should never hide away. You must stand out. Now let's talk about two other statistics in the UK Sikh survey. The first of these is around the census. You've been hearing in recent weeks us talk about the tests that the Office for National Statistics are carrying out in Hounslow and in Wolverhampton. And so we asked in the UK Sikh survey, how many of you would like a separate ethnic tick box for Sikhs? And 93.5% said they would like that separate tick box. That is a huge number. Government, the Office for National Statistics and politicians cannot ignore that number. Don't forget, at the last census in 2001, 84,000 people rejected the existing boxes, ticked other and wrote Sikh. That was a huge protest. And that's why we have the test that's currently going on in Hounslow and Wolverhampton to test the Sikh ethnic tick box. So take the survey, take what will hopefully come from those tests. If you correctly fill in that survey, we will be able to secure recognition from 40,000 public bodies for our right to a fair share of all services: education, health, local services, national services. Finally, I'm going to talk to you about the last statistic. The last statistic is concerning a code of practice for our 5 kakars, the Panj kakars, and the dastar, the turban. At the start of this programme, I spoke to you about the Mandla versus Lee case. So how in 1983 we won our rights in the House of Lords to be protected under the Race Relations Act of 1976. And we're protected because of racial discrimination. Later on, we have also won the right to be protected under religious discrimination laws under the Equality Act of 2010. However, let's look at what the courts have done. When a Christian lady went to the courts wearing her cross, she took that case saying, I'd been discriminated against because I wear a cross. She lost. Let's take Muslims that have been to the courts here and have argued the right to wear the hijab, and they've lost. Now, I give those examples because in the Mandla versus Lee case, Sikhs won because of racial discrimination. In 2008, Sarika Singh went to the High Court, and she had been excluded from school, a 14-year-old girl, a school in South Wales said she couldn't go to school wearing her kada. And what happened is that case was fought in the High Court with the support of the Sikh Federation and Liberty, and she won. And she won on the basis of racial discrimination. There was also a case under religious discrimination, which she didn't win. Therefore, this whole right that we have secured, linked to the Man Diversity case, is crucially important, because only the Sikhs and Jews are protected as separate ethnic groups, racial groups, as well as religions. Now, that final question that was asked was around the code of practice. Do we need a code of practice that brings these various laws? There are laws around the kirpan, there are laws around the turban at work sites, on motorcycles, construction sites. Bring that together in one place in a code of practice, which is set out in the Sikh Manifesto. And what we found is 94 people out of 100 said we would like a statutory code of practice. And the whole point of the statutory code of practice is that it allows, when an individual goes to work, goes to school, and has an issue to do with the turban, the kada, the kirpan, they can immediately point to the code of practice. The code of practice is in the interest of everyone, public bodies and individual Sikhs. And one final thing I want to finish upon is that many will say the UK Sikh survey, filled out by 4,559 people, perhaps it was biased. Perhaps it was people like me, Untitled Sikhs, that were filling this in. No. 60% of those people that responded did not have gears. They had cut their hair. So this was not biased towards Untitled Sikhs or even turban-wearing Sikhs. 60% of the respondents were people that had given up their identity, but they felt so strongly on the need for a code of practice on the Panchakar and the turban. They felt so strongly on the need for a separate ethnic tick box. They felt so strongly they still want to be recognised as Sikhs. Therefore, the results of the UK Sikh survey with respect to the Sikh identity is that what this means is that there is a clear body of data and evidence that policymakers here are now having to listen. That's why we're currently now working with government on a code of practice that hopefully in the next few months will start to take shape. We're talking to ministers that will endorse it, because we want it to make your lives as Sikhs easier. So please keep supporting our work. Support KTV. We're using KTV to serve you, share information with you, share knowledge, arm you with that knowledge so you can protect your rights and the rights of others. If you need more information, contact the Sikh Network. Their details are given at the bottom of the screen. They were the ones who developed the Sikh Manifesto and were responsible for this survey. And the survey actually is making lots of people stand up and listen. So thank you for listening to me. Keep supporting KTV, Sky, 858. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.